the 2 minutes of prep we did before, we talked about one of our favorite concepts is it's called use of self, which even by
Or,
itself is kind of a strange.
or self as instrument, which is
Self
even
as instrument is another one.
weirder. When I first
So
came across those concepts, I just thought that the labels were so weird. I've got used to them now, but took a while. But anyway,
it takes a minute. Is it helpful if I describe them first, or should we
I
just
think
jump
so
into conversation?
because you've got a much better, you got your head around them far better than I have, and I think I've got a little different take on them, but that'll come out as we talk.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd love to just jump right in, but okay. Let me try for a minute. Just for anybody watching and listening, if you've never heard of it, or even if you had, yeah, I appreciate the compliment, David. And yet, yeah, I think it's like other things. It's a lifelong practice to get
Mhm.
deeper and deeper understanding of it. But I don't know. Maybe start with a historical point of view.
Yeah.
Um, as I understand it, as I was taught, the concept use of self is also known, as you said, as self as an instrument. Comes out of a discipline called Gestalt psychotherapy. And without getting into all the Gestalt stuff, they basically said there is a self, there is something, um, and you can use it as an instrument. you, you can use it. So, my one of my mentors, Dr. May Yan Chen Judge, she described it in a few ways that I seem to recall. At least I hope these are her words, from what I can remember. Um, Self as an instrument, it's as if you were, think of like a musician, think of like a vocalist, someone who sings. When you sing, and you're, especially if you're on stage or performing in front of others, you have to get really skilled at your vocal cords, at your voice, right? That's like it's an
Mhm.
instrument, and you have to practice it, and you have to learn what to eat and drink and how to stretch it and improve your range and just all this quality of your voice. And I
Yeah.
sort of like that comparison because it's voice as an instrument, right? I think we all kind of know that one.
It's quite a nice metaphor. I can relate to that.
And then so like Mayan and Gestalt psychotherapy sort of took use of self or self as an instrument into the whole discipline of organization development.
Mhm.
OD, like other disciplines, is big and broad and hard to describe. So, I guess really quickly, the best I could say is one thing it's about is about group dynamics. What's going on in this group right now? So
Okay.
use of self related to organization development is, I guess what I was trying to say, I know I'm bouncing around a lot now, but voice as an instrument, when you're doing organization development work, your whole body, your whole self is the instrument. You are the one. And so a big part of it is being aware of everything that's going on for you. But one of the easy front doors into use of self is it's easy to think the way the world works for a lot of people is intellectual. How is my brain working? Am I smart? Do I understand? Like cognitive abilities, like part of that, as if that were the only thing in ourself.
Hmm.
Dr. Mayan Chen Judge and a few others did some research. Dr. David Jameson, they went out and asked hundreds of OD practitioners, what does use of self mean to you? And they, I think through inductive research, they didn't predefine it, but through the research, they found 9 categories. And I don't have them all memorized, although sadly, maybe I do.
I
I don't
think
have them in
I think they call them clusters, don't they? Rather than
clusters. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. What did I
clusters.
just say?
You call them categories, yeah.
Categories, but you're right.
Categories,
Clusters, even
clusters,
better.
yeah.
That was their word. But first cluster is cognitive. Second cluster is emotional. So that's just a nice front door. There's 7 more, but you know what I mean? Like if without spending a long time defining use of self, it's it comes from Gestalt psychotherapy. So there is a psychotherapeutic basis or principle underneath it. So it's a lot meant for healing. Um, and then it got applied to OD so that an OD practitioner was aware of what is this whole body, not just my head, not just my thinking. Um, what is this whole body bringing into this group? I'm not, what's the fancy word for it? Exogenous. I'm not separate from this group. As
Okay.
an OD practitioner, I am also in the group. So don't pretend like as a consultant or even as an internal employee, as if you're not in the group. You are in the group and you are having an impact.
Oh,
on the group. So
okay. So again, don't see yourself as separate from the group. Don't see yourself as, you know, as it's like observing the world and thinking you're an objective observer. You're not. You're
you're
part of
not.
it. You're part of it.
And the other comparison I always like to make just 2 seconds for anybody is uh, journalists and lawyers. I'm not a journalist, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really speak, but my understanding from the outside of those fields is you're supposed to remove yourself from your work. If you're a journalist, you're supposed to go to the environment and objectively define what's going on. Do
Yeah.
not bring your
Yeah.
bias
Yeah.
into it, I think.
And
Same
really,
thing with a lawyer.
this is challenging that stance and saying, "Hey, no, you can't do that. Well, you can try to do it, but in reality, you can't really do it. And hey, rather than try not to do it, bring yourself, who you are, to the
And I know clusters number 7 and 9 are continuous improvement. They're self-work. They're like
this. Yeah,
really, really get to know what you're bringing in.
those clusters are kind of strange because we haven't got it here, but it's a 9 by 9 matrix. It's a nice little chart. And
Three, three by three, yeah.
yes, sorry, yeah, 3 by 3. I kind of struggle with them because they're a little bit inconsistent, and one of the things I've tried to do a few times is create my own clusters or categories, but I've I've never had the discipline to stick to it. But it's kind of weird because there were two clusters there for personal development, which
Yep.
um, I never
It's
quite figured out.
it's the only one that's repeated twice, and when we
Is it?
train on it, and then I've got my big question for you, like
Oh,
in a
okay.
second, but just to go to that one, yeah, number 7 and number 9. Number 7 is self work, and number 9 is continuous self work. So the difference is
Right, yeah.
in number 7, have you ever meditated? Have you ever gone to a therapist? Have you ever journaled? Have you ever had a massage? Have you ever done anything that helps you sort of, like you say, sort of be the observer, step back and see yourself or heal yourself or change yourself? There's an old phrase in OD that says, you can't take a group where you haven't taken yourself. So if you sort of haven't done transformational change on yourself, and it's a debatable phrase, but
Mhm.
fine. So that's number 7 is like, have you ever done it once? If I oversimplify number 7, number 9, if I oversimplify it, is great. You did it once. Now do it a million times.
Okay, okay, that makes sense. I mean, it's interesting because I think you introduced me to the concept originally. And like I normally do, this was a few years ago now. I went away. This was before ChatGPT, AI. I just went away and Googled it, and I came up with a ton of material, mainly sort of for social workers and the like. And it was so complex, so technical that it was almost impenetrable. And I can't remember that there were other disciplines as well. And the one thing I took away from that is that um, different disciplines approaches and use a different language to describe it. So anybody looking at it for the first time, if they just go out to the web and Google it, I think a lot. Well, I almost just completely backed off because it was not scary, but just this is this is weird, if you like, is the best word for it. But then when I stuck to it and tried to get my own head around it, I warmed to it. Now the one thing you didn't say there, um, and for me, well, you can correct me on this. It was my first thought about it, and the thing I liked about it is use of self. So for me, a big part of that is recognizing what your own strengths, personal strengths or weaknesses are. So if you are not very good, and again, I'm taking this out of OD, if you're not very good at standing on stage and giving a presentation, then don't do it. If you're a lot better working in small groups, having a conversation, work to that. Recognize what you're good at and recognize what you're not good at, and bring that, you know, bring your true self, if you like, to whatever it is you're doing. Do you see it like that, or a little differently?
Yes and no. I would almost go slightly more macro or meta or something and say, um, as you're saying that, what's going on for me is I notice the bifurcation. Is that the right word? I noticed the dichotomy of
Mhm.
strengths and weaknesses. And so like what causes us to think about good and bad, strengths and weaknesses. I know one of the definitions, I don't have it quite memorized, but it's something like uh, conscious use of whole self, aware of your um, I know in the definition they use the word blind spots. I'm not a big fan of blind spots, but like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
sort of like aware of what you're not aware of, if that makes any sense.
Again, a
But
lot of
anyway,
this is about awareness. It's like continuous awareness when you're engaging with somebody, to be aware of yourself and to aware of them and to aware of the environment and the context. Because far too often we just lose that awareness, especially in a conversation. Very quickly you lose all
there's
awareness.
a there's always a lot going on, right? There's like
Yes, yes, yeah.
stuff going on in your head and your heart, my head, my heart. There's stuff going on between us, and it's all ever changing. So it's like, what are you noticing? What you grab awareness of, and then yeah, the one I was going to say a second ago is uh, conscious use of oneself with intentional choice. So there's a big part of use of self that's like, what is your range of choice?
Uh-huh.
And it's almost like autopilot or catching yourself on autopilot or saying, remember 2 weeks ago, right? When you talked about the adjacent possible.
Yes, yes.
So in conversation, maybe this is because my question for you is, how does use of self apply to conversational leadership? We're
Absolutely.
almost there. We're not quite
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think adjacent possible might be very close because use of self might say, hmm, I noticed David talking about strengths and weaknesses.
Got
I
got
could have
you.
agreed with that and
That's
gone
an
down that
amazing
path.
connection, John. I like that.
What's that?
That
Sorry.
I like that connection. That's a really good connection. We've done
It's
this now a couple of times, just talking, making connections with different things.
yeah, across our
That,
talks here.
yeah, that connects.
And yeah, I still don't know too. Like, let's just keep that broader question then. How does use of self apply? Because it's usually applied to Gestalt psychotherapy and it's usually applied to OD, organization development. And that's pretty much it. And even in those two applications, it's similar but different. I I can get pretty excited to think we could actually do our all of us, anybody watching, we could do our own research and go to conversational leaders, just like Mayan and David did,
Oh
and
yes,
say,
absolutely. I mean, I think the OD psychotherapy, um, the way social workers use it, I find that a bit of a turn off. It gets too kind of techy and too sort of abstract. Um, But what I wanted to do, and I still want to do, we've been talking about this for 3 or 4 years, I think, is just take the basic concepts and apply it to conversational leadership. I mean, apply it to our work, and strip away some of the some of the complex sort of arcane sort of language, so that, because it's something that everybody can apply, everybody.
"Yep,
Because at the heart of it, it's about being more aware of yourself, aware of the situation, aware of other people, being more observant, um, recognizing, I think, you know, your strengths and your weaknesses. Um, so we,
it's
you and I really should spend some time to work on this.
and here we are a little bit. I
A little
like
bit, yeah, yeah.
conscious choice, which again to me is underpinned by what choices are you aware of and what work have you done to have more choices available to you,
That comes back to the adjacent possible.
adjacent possible, and role. And role makes me a bit
Okay.
uncomfortable because, again, in use of self, Mayan's definition, it says something about conscious use of self in a choiceful, intentional choice um, to effectively apply one's role in any situation. And it's that role part that I don't like because for me, I don't know, this is probably my own work to do. Um, I don't necessarily enjoy going into a conversation. You talked about facilitation. I don't
Mhm.
necessarily want to go into a room and for the next 6 hours, I'm your facilitator as if I have no other role, as if I'm not John or human or dad
Uh-huh.
or friend or brother. You know what I mean? So I think use of self is trying to say, okay, you've got those other roles, but for now, focus on this role in this situation. And I think you and I might agree on this, and I don't, maybe other OD and use of self people would agree too, that like, I think there's more complexity there. I think
Yeah.
maybe there's a little a hierarchy or a map of roles that I play. Maybe I confuse others, maybe I confuse myself, but I would sort of like to have intentional choice across a complexity of roles. Sure, maybe I'm facilitating a group for 6 hours and privileged and lucky to do that, but I'd sort of like to be able to step into comedian role and uh, direction setter role and congratulator role. Like I think that that
Okay.
use that
Sure.
conscious use of here it almost a little bit goes to and maybe this is conversational too, is situational leadership, right?
Okay.
That there's like four choices in that model, and sometimes you do this, sometimes you do this, yeah. I've often thought in use of self, or now trying to get out of OD and over to conversation. I'd like to think in any conversation, I could have a multitude of roles at any given point in that conversation
Okay. You
and make
you
choice based on that.
you made something a little bit clearer for me there, because when I think of role, I think of my role as a husband, as a father, as a brother, as a as a child, even if my parents are dead. I see roles in that light. You're seeing roles in terms of different types of behavior. I can take on I can take on a, I'm going to call it a backward role. I can sit in the background and listen. Might be one role, or I could step forward and engage, which might be considered another role. Is that the way you normally use the term role?
I think I'm probably a bit strange. I think most people would do it more
Really?
like
Yeah. I think you're
like
a bit strange on that.
always, yeah. Job title. I think more people consider their role
Oh,
to
job
be,
title. Yes,
you
they
know what I
do.
mean?
They do.
I
Yeah.
In this situation, I am the manager. In this situation, I am the senior leader.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That role. And I think even OD people are often, my role is OD consultant. Like
Yeah.
as opposed to those examples I was just giving you of comedian or something like that. No, no, no. But yeah, that's why I say it, because I struggle a little bit with role, and if we try to take it over to conversation, I don't know. Do you feel like, are you ever aware in conversation of a role you're playing?
I think I am. Yes. I'm not too sure I could give you examples of it, but it seems to strike a chord. I guess I've never analyzed my conversations quite like that. But yes, I suspect if I sat back and thought about it, I do subconsciously fall into different sorts of roles.
And I think it's that subconscious part that use of self says, make it conscious.
Make it conscious, be aware of it, be aware of what you're doing.
I'm in dad mode. I'm in dad role, and in dad role, I'm loving, I'm supportive, right? And I
What's
could be
that?
talking to my child, but in talking to my child, I can switch out of dad mode and go to friend mode. And now I'm making other choices and I'm aware of,
Yeah, you reminded me of, what is it, parent, adult, child, or
yeah, transactional analysis. Yeah.
that analysis? Yes, which it's quite interesting doing that in a conversation at times, especially with a member of the family.
Sure.
But yeah, okay.
So then I still think the same question for me for, I don't know, a couple of minutes here is,
Mm.
how does use of self apply to conversational leadership? If we went out and asked a bunch of people and you were just the first, what adjacent possible we've said, role, conscious choice, what else does like bringing your full self to a conversation, or you know what, maybe I'll ask you slightly differently. Do you happen to have any examples, because I think we both do, where it's kind of clear to you that someone is not using use of self? They're on autopilot, or they're not
Yeah,
present,
yeah.
or I don't know, they're doing something else that is not self.
I can think it's interesting. I was in a conversation not so long back, a group conversation, and there's one person, when they get talking, they seem to lose all sense of time. and they just talk and talk and talk. It's a very long monologue, and they go back over and they go back over it and they repeat themselves many, many times. And there's, to my mind at least, I could well be wrong, you know, because I'm judging here, that they're really not aware of what they're doing. They're in they're in monologue role. They're in monologue mode, and they've completely cut out anything around them. They they don't even give that little, you know, in a good conversation, you pause for a second between sort of segments, and that gives the opportunity for somebody else to come in. But they don't do that. They just go so fast and everything's so compact that the only way to cut into that conversation is to talk over them.
Mm.
And even when you talk over them, they tend not to go quiet. They tend to, it tends to then be a competition, and you think, okay, I'm not going to bother. You know, just let them talk. And of course, then what you do is you tune out, and actually, then it's not a conversation, as you call it. It's a silly monologue or
Yeah.
whatever. But yeah. Um, so yeah, I think there's a big role to play here in being more aware when you're having a conversation as to what's going on, and being more aware, as we've said, about adjacent possibilities, and being more aware how other people are reacting to what you're saying, and having the ability to maybe adjust the style, the tone of what you're having to say to, you know, to create a more effective, quote unquote, productive conversation. I never like the term productive conversations. It sounds as if they're going to be so focused on producing an outcome.
Otherwise, it's a failure. Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a failure. But that's not quite what I mean when I say productive. It's
Yeah. I think for me, it's popping up intent and impact. Just if I throw out some of it is
yeah,
closer to OD jargon, but yeah, in conversation, are you clear on your intent before you speak? And
yes,
are you ever checking on the impact? How did that land with
yeah,
you?
yeah,
How did you,
yeah.
that kind of stuff? And then conversational dynamics,
Okay,
which is, I don't know, we've talked about it a million times and it still blows my mind a little bit, but what's what's the conversational process? What is this ever changing thing that's going on in the conversation itself? I think use of self would also want to have awareness of that.
yeah,
Uh,
right.
yeah.
I think we've overrun our time.
Okay.
We should come to an end.